covered more cities. So Grace will share some interesting facts and findings from this research. And they should offer also a foundation for our follow-up discussion in a panel format where we have fellow panelists on Zoom session with us here. They are currently muted, but they will later step forward and we will discuss a couple of topics that are currently sort of hot topics in the China education market. So we want to explore what are some of the long-term effects of the pandemic and the lockdown over the year and a half, over more than a year and a half so far, and how has this affected the operation of agents, students and parents, decision-making, perceptions, destination appeal, recruitment channels, agent market activity. And amidst of this, as you have followed the industry news, you probably know that at the same time, Chinese government has introduced various sort of regulation measures to regulate the compulsory education sector and the after-school tuition sector in China. So that's also unfolding in the market, and we look forward to share some of our perspectives and insider views on how these regulations interact with the overall situation in China's education market, and whether there is effect on study abroad market and the future trends, which is something we will conclude with to try to give some perspective on further development and some practical tips and takeaways, how to conduct student recruitment effectively, despite existing circumstances in China, how to remain in tune with the market, how to further maintain or perhaps grow market share and remain relevant. So I hope you'll enjoy the session. Please feel free to post any questions, either in chat or preferably into the Q&A part of the Zoom interface. And we will select them towards the end, try to take as many as we can to have a good follow-up discussion. So the Q&A will follow towards the end. Having said that, let me introduce Grace Zhu, our China branch manager at BONARD. Grace is my fellow colleague, and she runs our branch office in China, which is established and dedicated for the purpose of assisting overseas educators to enter China, to develop recruitment channels, to identify and meet quality agent partners and be effective in student recruitment. So over to you, Grace.
Oh, thank you, Igor, for the opening and the introduction. And thank you all for joining us today for our webinar on how has student recruitment in China changed. As Igor just mentioned, if there's any questions during or after the presentation, feel free to write it down on the Q&A part. Before having our panelists to share their experience on student recruitment and highly discussed topics, I would like to briefly present some findings from our recent Chinese agent market update. Well, as Igor just mentioned, for some of you might know that we have been updating the new Tier 1 cities agents market and have already released 5 city reports by far, which you could have full access. The 10 selected cities stand out among all the new Tier 1 cities, either based on their agencies numbers or industry focus. On the left hand, you can actually see the cities that we have already researched. And also you can see from the map in the middle that we also factored in the because of the geographic factors. Our data collection and agencies outreach began over 10 years ago, and our researchers have been monitoring the market and updating it regularly. There are actually some interesting findings when comparing those 5 cities that we have recently researched. And over here that we can see the general population and also the data of education level. As in Shandong and Sichuan province, where the city Qingdao and Chengdu located, the population under 14 years old are actually higher than average, which is 15%. So therefore, there might be more potential for current K-12 and future higher education programs to develop. And meanwhile, there's a higher education level in Jiangsu province, which the provincial capital city is Nanjing. And the city is also have a stronger academic atmosphere. When reflecting on international education, later on, we can also find out there are more active agencies in Nanjing. On the other hand, in Sichuan province, most of the active agencies located in Chengdu, as the overall education level in other cities of Sichuan province is lower due to the influence of the terrain and economic level. When it comes to cities, specifically here that we can see Hangzhou is better developed with many large tech enterprises headquartered over there. Well, yet due to the fact they are close to Shanghai and also Nanjing, actually, there are not so many active agencies in Hangzhou. As for Shenyang, since the overall economic situation isn't as high as the other new Tier 1 cities, students and agencies prefer lower cost programs or study destinations. Well, so in general, that we can actually see there's a correlation between the economic situation and level of education. Actually, compared to 10 years ago, the overall population structure is already approaching aging. So the double relief policy, which we're going to mention later on, and also the recent 3-child policy, both considered to deal with that. So as we all know, China is no longer an easy market for education industry anymore, and definitely needs more attention and to be more competitive in the market. We also reflect over here on the agency's activity. We have reached out to over 2,000 agencies in total. And among them, there are over 400 active in with international education currently in these 5 cities. And you can also see the distribution on the map over here. What's worth to mention is that among all the agencies that we have reached, Qingdao has only 10% still operating as normal. Well, yet, of course, more than half of them are actually reachable, which means they probably post related business for now, but they have higher flexibility in terms of designation or program types preference. And in Nanjing, there are around 35% still active, which is the highest among all the cities that we have researched. One of the main reasons is the education level, as we just mentioned. Well, meanwhile, in Chengdu, the active agencies are also comparable higher because of the tourism industry development over there and also the globalization of the city. Well, when moving on to the agency's profile, as we can see, small agencies who has only 1 office still have a higher proportion and market share. Well, actually, the total offices number of big and medium-sized agencies combined is nearly equal to the total office numbers of small agencies. Based on our experience, it's actually quite important to find out if those branch offices of the big agencies can have the decision-making power when it comes to the overseas partners cooperation. because it can be different case by case. And when researching on the type of programs preference, as mentioned earlier, because Qingdao agencies that are more flexible and they have a higher proportion of the students younger than 14 years old. So you can see there are more agencies are promoting K-12 programs compared to other cities. And meanwhile, there are only 2% in Qingdao right now are still promoting short-term programs, which because these short-term programs have a larger impact by COVID, and Qingdao agencies can adjust their business focus and react on it faster than other cities. Well, overall, agencies are still mainly focused on the higher education programs, and around 1/3 are promoting K-12 programs. Well, when it comes to years of experience, there are a couple of milestones around 2008 and last couple of years, mainly because of the 2008 Beijing Olympic Games, which brought more opportunity for international education, and also the recent years globalization of China. Over here, we actually also interviewed agencies in terms of their opinion on online programs. Only 16% are currently promoting them, and mainly from Hangzhou and Chengdu. Agencies would prefer the format of online plus in-campus combined program because students still want overseas experience. And there are barely any Qingdao agencies are promoting the online programs because, as we mentioned earlier, there's less higher education programs promoting in Qingdao. Agencies normally prefer industry introduction when it comes to choosing the partners to work with, because they would consider it more targeted and also trustworthy. Well, due to the impact of COVID, nearly half of the agencies were struggling sending students abroad last year. 26% was able to secure 10 to 20 students where their online plus in-campus model. Well, of course, a couple of agencies also shared they were able to sign over 30 students last year, but it's actually also a sharply decreased for themselves compared to previous years. Regarding the destination preference, as we said, Qingdao agencies are more flexible and faster react on the industry changes. So the demand of UK over there is higher than US, with the increasing inquiry to UK among the whole market. In general, actually, we found out there's no significant changes for destinations such as Japan or Korea compared to before COVID. It's stable. Well, lastly, we would like to share more about this double relief policy, or some people call it double reduction policy. And for those who's not familiar with this term, this is the policy released by our government a couple of months ago. And the main purpose of it is to better regulate the tutoring companies and for students to have a better quality of education in campus. When the policy firstly released, it drew huge attention among the whole industry, as quite many agencies also have tutoring sectors, and it also regulated the foreigner teachers outside of China who's in the online tutoring programs. So how it may affect the international education industry and how students' preference would change with the hot topics. To better find out, we are monitoring the general feedback from the agencies, And also we had some in-depth communication with a couple of agencies. The results could come out as a surprise to many of the people, I would say, because the agencies are considering positive influence with the policy. Well, since it's a newly released policy and the measures are taken to implement can be vary from different provinces or cities, so most of the agencies haven't really felt the influence in terms of international education yet. But long-term speaking, some agencies think it would widen the widen the differences of student performance at school, and so it may have impact on the future enrollment, which may lead to some students to pursue overseas institutions for better education opportunity. So agencies would like to make the best use of the situation and just provide more options for the students in need. So it actually lies on the institutions on how to react and also seize the opportunity. Well, lastly, we would like to also mention that, from previous slides, that we can see the increasing opportunity for new tier 1 cities. The agencies over there have a more stable student source, and also there are some governmental support. Therefore, we designed a product, the new tier 1 virtual trip mission, which will be held early November this year. Well, you can still sign up, but the places are limited. So if you have any questions or want more info, you can also reach out to us. Well, yeah, okay, and thank you all, and over to you, Igor.
Thank you, Grace, for the insightful presentation and the update on the Asian markets that you and the team are doing continuously in China. I think you presented some interesting facts about particular cities, as well as some qualitative data on how agents are perceiving the double relief policy, so we can follow that up in the upcoming discussion. And please feel free to stay until the rest of the webinar in case there would be any questions associated with the agent research that you're doing. Now, let me welcome our fellow panelists. So if I could ask them to come on the virtual stage, share their video and unmute. We have with us today Anna Guo, the Associate Director of Sales for Greater China and Korea ApplyBoard. Hello, Anna. We have John Santangelo, who acts as spokesman and senior consultant at Beijing Overseas Study Service Alliance, or short for BOSSA, the agency association. We have Matthew Durnin, Global Head of Insights and Consultancy at British Council. And we have Shirley Xu, the Vice President for Channel Development Global at Shorelight Education. So hello, everybody, and perhaps feel free to give a short introduction and context about each of you, perhaps in the same order as introduced, starting with Anna.
Thank you so much, Igor and Grace. It's my great pleasure here today to be in part of this panel, and it's truly an honor to be here with Matthew, Shirley, and John. As you introduced, my name is Anna. I'm working in ApplyBoard, the biggest online education platform in the world. And later on, I'm more than happy to share more my knowledge and experience regarding how the international education industry gonna go for China market. Thank you.
John, go ahead.
Hello and good evening from Guangzhou in China. I'm John, and I've been with BOSSA, the Agency Association of China, for about 7.5 years now. BOSSA has about 300 members altogether some of the most recognizable education agencies in the country, all the way down to middle and small-sized agents. And we exist to train and guide the industry in China when it comes to study abroad consulting. And we've been around since 2004. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Matthew, please.
As Igor mentioned earlier, I'm head of Global Insights and Consultancy at the British Council. So my team supports UK universities with analysis and consultancy services to drive their international work, whether that be student recruitment or transnational education. I worked in China for about 13 years, but recently relocated to the US. But still follow China quite closely, and that's where a lot of our activity takes place. So very much looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. And Shirley.
Thanks, Igor. Hello, everyone, and hi from Shanghai during very late at night. I'm Shirley. As I just mentioned, I'm based in Shanghai. In just 2 or 3 months' time, it will be my 8 years anniversary with Shorelight. So it's been a great journey. In the past 18 months, was like going through all this kind of challenges, but it's also a very exciting journey that a lot to share with the panelists here and the others on the line tonight.
Thank you. And I will wrap up the round of introduction. My name is Igor Skibickij. I act in the capacity of Chief Operations Officer at BONARD. I've stayed with the company for 12 years, and I spent 7 years of that in China, sort of preceding Grace as the head of our branch office. So even though I'm not in China anymore, I'm still very connected and very passionate about the education market over there, as the rest of our panelists. So having said that, and before we go into our first series of questions, I would like to bring up the first of our poll questions. We have a few prepared, so if I could ask my colleagues in the background to publish the first poll, and feel free to vote on how do you foresee the student recruitment in China in the upcoming academic year compared to the previous year. Feel free to submit your preference, and we will publish the results shortly. In the meantime, I'd like to open the conversation with the first question, which is a bit of a broader perspective in how do you see the state of the China's education market after more than a year and a half of pandemic experience and lockdown and travel restrictions, both inbound and outbound. And how has that shaped or changed the ways agents operate as the main source of student applications abroad and the main channel, but also students and parents' perception, their perception of destinations, their perception of ways of study. So have they studied increasingly online, or do they expect to travel abroad and defer their studies? Just to get a broad view before we go into particulars. And if I may open with Matthew, what would be your perspective?
From what we're seeing, I think the real pain that's being felt by universities is around China postgraduate. I think the undergraduate students, just if you look at their options, or more accurately, the lack of other options, we're going to continue to see strong mobility from undergraduates, or at least, learning remotely, similar to what we saw last year. Really good on the enrollment side for UK universities, less so for actual arrivals in the UK. A lot of Chinese students last year were fairly certain they would travel in January. Of course, the announcement of the Alpha variant, which was unhelpfully, called the UK variant in media, caused a lot of them to rethink plans kind of last minute. So, our best estimates around 50% actually arrived in person last year. I think, our baseline case for this year looks a lot like what we hoped for last year, is that we'll have strong enrollments, but delayed arrivals in many cases. So fingers crossed, no new variants that really make people reconsider their decisions to study, to travel overseas. But I think looking at more the kind of timeline we were expecting for last year. Again, we do think there'll be some continued delays to postgraduate. The reality is, I think in what we've seen in the past is that postgraduate students can have more flexibility in delaying their plans. And as if the economy does worsen, we do tend to see more effects at the postgraduate level for international students than, say, undergraduate students.
Thank you. If I could follow up to Anna. Anna, how do you see, from your perspective, the impact of COVID over long term and overall shifts and preferences in the Asian market and China market?
Thank you, Igor. I think compared now to 2020, the recovery and the growth is quite strong, but not strong enough. Taking Canada as a study destination as an example, there are around 30,000 study permits issued to Chinese students in 2019. And this number significantly dropped to less than 9,000 in 2020. But when we look at this year, the first 6 months, the number increased to more than 18,000, which is 2 times compared to 2020 and 60% of 2019, which is before COVID. For me, I believe the market is in recovery mode and the long-term growth will remain very promising. However, I have to see the COVID, also the policy environment in China did bring us lots of challenges. And it's very important for us to transform all those challenges to opportunities and positive changes in the long term. For me, our team at ApplyBoard, we are already working on planning now for 2022 and 2023 because we think like both the short term and long term are quite important. And I think it's the responsibility for all of us to work closely with each other to rebuild the market confidence, develop strategies under the new norms, and execute for solid results. That is my observation.
Thank you, Anna. Those are some interesting figures in support of for possible recovery. Shirley, if I may ask you, what's your perspective on the market, and perhaps to share a little bit on how did your Asian partners sort of deal with the circumstances in the market? You work extensively with agents. How did they manage to survive, to adapt? What are they doing? If you could.
Thanks, Ika. I think it started with some of the kind of Shorelight student trained first to was like compare 2020 to 2021, and then relate it back to the agencies, how we work together, survive this. So a bit of echoed what Anna just mentioned, that we do see strong recovery, in particular since May, the visa and border opened this May. But we're talking about if the enrollment volume, it's actually quite flat 2021 versus 2020, because there's a lot of kind of rolling over volumes from 2019, right? And we all know that overseas study is a very long time, almost 1 or 2 years preparation for the students for their study plan. So, but having said that, volume itself dropped from 2019, but the total enrollment stayed quite kind of flat 2020, 2021. We do see it's a very encouraging sign that at least for Shorelight representing the US kind of programs and major students are actually for UG programs. We do have a very strong undergraduate programs offerings. 4 of the universities are top 100, and the recovering is definitely stable and steady. And one of the very exciting data I want to share that is that only in August, our application volume already doubled last year. New applications doubled last year the same months. So I would say that it is not kind of as fast as we expected. We do expect it goes back to 2019, the big volume, but it's not realistic. But however, the trend is strongly coming back. And talking about agencies, we do see, unfortunately, as Grace just shared in the previous PPT, that unfortunately some of them are not going to survive in the pandemic, but we do actually see some of those key partners in the market. We are working closely together to really seeking the opportunities, for example, some of the local programs, and we are actually working even closer during the pandemic and trying to find opportunities.
Thank you, Shirley. Very interesting insights. And perhaps we can round it up with John's feedback. John, you are uniquely positioned between the agents, the government, and also the overseas educators. So how did BOSSA perceive the long-term impact?
Well, I can begin with saying that overall the student market is gradually rebounding from last year, although the recovery is not evenly balanced. Overall higher ed enrollment, both undergrad and postgrad, is not, of course, not back to pre-COVID 2019 levels, but they are steadily rising. But for boarding schools and secondary ed, demand is still lagging due to a few reasons. I think the main in particular is families are not fully comfortable sending their child abroad because of the pandemic. So some parents enrolled their child into a private bilingual school in China last year, and they just decided to let them finish out there. But there are still plenty of families who want to send their child abroad and get educated and have that immersed setting. So we do expect the secondary ed sector to slowly rise over the next year. And as for what is the education market doing to survive, in particular for agents, I can say the hierarchy of some of the biggest names in the study abroad market has changed a little bit. Most of the recognized brands are still on the top, though a few new names have entered what we used to call the big four. Anyway, last year, agencies were cutting overhead and management costs by reducing salaries, downsizing staff, and finding new offices, or cutting down on rents and getting smaller offices. Generally, the larger sized agents were less agile than the small and medium sized ones, though majority of the agents who, even in your studies, showed that shut down were the smaller agents. But as of now, our membership, which is about a half to a third based or headquartered in Beijing, and the rest are in other provinces throughout China, we can report that the vast majority of them are still in business, and even reporting increases in numbers of clients this year in 2021. So
thank you, John. So it seems that across we have certain careful optimism about the market recovering. The numbers are growing, even though it's moderate growth, but the agents managed to adjust, and it seems like it could be overall a better year. So let's bring up the results from the previous poll, from the first poll, to see how this overlaps with the perception of the audiences. And we see it's probably similar, that the most significant perception is that it could be slight increase for the academic year 21-22 as compared to the previous year. Okay. Moving on to the probably hotly debated topic, and I will jump straight to it, the double relief policy. I think many people are here to hear some insider view in terms of understanding what's actually happening and what is the impact on the education market. Is there any impact on the study abroad market as such through the regulations that have been implemented, and how is the situation unfolding? I know, John, that you wanted to weigh in on this topic, so let's stay with you, and if you could give us your perspective.
Yeah, thanks a lot. This was the topic I was really looking forward to speaking about this evening or morning, wherever you are. So I have heard misinformation out there, and I'd just like to take a minute to help set the record and clarify some misconceptions, in particular how the policies do and do not affect education agencies and the study abroad industry as a whole. First, do the policies affect education agents? No, but there's a little caveat. The policies target training centers and tutoring companies which specialize in subjects taught in the national curriculum, including the Zhongkao and Gaokao national exams. Study abroad agencies fall under completely separate entities. Although a few agencies also have training and tutoring divisions, which were affected. One name that might stand out is New Oriental. They are a giant when it comes to the after-school training business and have been for a long time. Vision Overseas is their study abroad agency division. But back to topic, training centers require a completely different business license than education agencies do, and it is a lot harder and costlier to obtain that license. It is not legal for education agents to offer this kind of training and tutoring without the license. Second, the relationship between training centers and agents. Sometimes training centers can be symbiotic or serve as feeders to agents, but agents don't necessarily depend on them. By the time a student hires an agent, they either already attain the needed language requirements for applications, or if not, they will go to a language or foundation program abroad. And third, how the policies will inevitably affect study abroad as a whole. Once students reach the 10th grade level, they're free to get tutoring on weekends and holidays, use foreign textbooks, and start training in IELTS, TOEFL, and SAT. But the policies do make it more difficult for younger students below grade 10 to learn, say, English and prepare to go abroad at an earlier age, since there's no holidays or weekends allowed for tutoring and training. As BOSSA's president, Mr. Song, said in a public statement, the cost of preparing to study abroad will inevitably rise, and it does have some serious impact on students who are young. There will be fewer in-country English and language training options, and the available options will be more expensive. So students may go abroad at earlier ages for either short-term programs, English camps, or language schools, foundational courses, rather than stay within country.
Thank you,
more
John.
to say, but I'd like to just, stop right there,
Sure.
please.
Thank you. And let's probably bring up our second poll because it's quite related to the topic. What was the impact on the new double relief policy on the agent market? So if my colleagues could submit it for voting. Matthew, in your line of work, how did you come to perceive the regulations, the policies that were enrolled, and how do you perceive a potential impact on study abroad or not?
I would say, first of all, that it really shouldn't have been an enormous surprise to anyone who's been watching China very closely for the last decade. I think a lot of the policy direction and indeed the policies have been in place for quite some time. And if you read, going all the way back to the National Education Law, which is well over a decade old, it was quite clear that the government had an intention to target a lot of the kind of profit-seeking activities around education. That this just wasn't going to be, that the private sector was not going to have a central role in education in China. So I think it shouldn't have been much of a surprise. I think what's changed over the Xi Jinping administration is that we've started to see a lot of things that maybe were on the books but not enforced. And now it's quite different in that if it's on the books, it's going to be enforced, has to be our assumption. And the letter of the law will matter a lot. In terms of effect on outbound study, in the near to medium term, I would say very little impact. I think there is a question longer term, particularly as, when John brought up the, access to English language training for younger students, that is going to have an effect on some of the long-term attractiveness of the China market, or I guess the growth in the China market, because perhaps we'll get back to this later in the conversation, but I mean, something that we've looked at the British Council over the last few years is that we were probably expecting a leveling off in outbound study over the next few years from China, regardless of the pandemic, just because of the fundamental drivers of outbound study. But if we looked at the long-term potential for the market, the big question was whether those kind of trends we saw over the last 2 decades in first and second tier cities were really going to trickle down into third and fourth and smaller cities and further inland into China. As we start restricting some access to English language training at younger ages, we're going to bump up against some student capability issues, if you start looking at areas for potential growth. I think the other thing worth considering is whether these policies could sprawl a bit to affect some other areas. And I think we have seen a lot of government attention to the international, private international education for grades after year 9. So when students can leave compulsory education, and the international schools within public high schools. We'd already seen a lot of Ministry of Education scrutiny on that going back to say 2015 or 2016, when we saw really sharp growth, a lot of the first tier cities putting moratoriums on these programs. I think we need to leave open the possibility that some of that could be affected, and that will create some complications, I think, for some pathways. I don't think that it'll be a dead end. I think there are capacity issues in China that are going to persist for well over a decade. Even as Chinese universities improve, even as the youth population declines, we're going to see constrained supply, and that's going to force students to continue to look abroad. But I think it could shake up the market a bit if we do continue to see some intervention around some of those preparatory areas for outbound study. I don't believe that the Chinese government is going to intercede in any way to directly interfere with students going abroad. Just the reality is, if you look at, say, the Communist Party and where many of the leaders' children are being educated or have been educated, the reality is they're not going to, many of them have gone abroad, and it's not something that the government is going to interfere with directly.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Very insightful. And as I gonna ask the similar question, Anna, let's bring up the poll results. How was the effect on the agent market? So the number of agencies will be reduced is the prevailing perception of the audiences. So Anna, what do you think about that?
Actually, I quite agree with Matthew's point. I think for most people who, like most Chinese people who themselves go through the K-12 in China, like myself, and also people who always pay close attention to China market, this policy really didn't come as a shock. Actually, I think from the 1950s, the Chinese government has called for reducing students' burden. In Chinese, it's 减负, for many times. Although the context and the socio-economic situation in China have been changed dramatically over time. Instead of a policy, I see this announcement of this double relief more like a plan for real execution, how to solve all those problems. In Mandarin Chinese, there is a saying that if you want to plan for the next 100 years, the education is the most fundamental and important thing. So from there, you can see like it's really important for the government to provide affordable, quality, inclusive education to the public. However, what we have observed in China market today is education has been closely correlated with real estate, with financial capital, with the declining birth rate, which really raised a concern from the Chinese government. That's how like they issue this policy in this hard time. However, I think to what extent this policy, along with its following implementations at different level, like city level, provincial level, could really solve those socio-economic problem. I don't know. I think it still requires lots of efforts from different perspectives. It really takes time.
Thank you. And we have one more poll question related to this, so let's bring it up. And in the meantime, I'm going to ask Shirley. Shirley, do you think the policy will be able to solve some of these bigger structural challenges that Chinese society is facing, such as alleviating the burden on children's study, alleviating the burden on parents spending on education, and therefore trying to stimulate the demographic situation?
Yeah, I think as a parent, I'm the one that really welcome this policy, because I no longer was worried about when my 5-year-old go to enter in the primary school, there will be a huge amount of homework bring back to do. So really, I think in some way that at least relieve a lot of parents' burden because the policy. But I echoed, and I just mentioned that any kind of policy change or revolution, we have to experience the early stage of the big pain. Just give you a very kind of a simple example I heard from one of my colleagues, that because we cut all those kind of after class training, right? So the kids have to have somewhere to stay after their normal kind of school time was like after 3 or 4 o'clock. And for the parents, they're still working. The school now it's already offering 1 or 2 hours. It was like after class tutoring hours already. They're doing this, but the pain is that they don't have any good content to fill in. So the kids was there grouped in the class, and the teacher are there, but there's nothing to do. There's no interactions. No was like the tutorings. It's just there. So the kind of the implementation, like Anna said, will be a kind of different level of implementation, varies in a big city and small city, different province. But I think that that's the early stage kind of pain we have to go through. And I'm still positive that because the government seems very determined, and in the coming with like 5 or 10 years, we will see a much kind of a positive outcome, really relieve all those kind of burdens of the parents and students here. So two more things I want to add related to this double relief, because John just saying that it's any impact to the kind of agencies recruiting overseas study students business. I would say yes, they will have some, because although that they have this kind of separate operation of overseas study and training department, but somehow that the training department, training division, they actually cultivate the pool of students. So those students will be feeding to the overseas study department for the future overseas kind of a business. So I see this will be the huge challenge, in particular for the big 2C. They always like have big or small portion of training business. And because the policy, there will be impact that they will be losing their kind of advantages student pool. So we will see that it's very interesting. We already see the trend that the big 2C already starting to think about going to the B2B market. So we will see in this sector will become even more crowded, and it's very interesting to see how the channels pattern become a new model, a new pattern in the coming 1 or 2 years.
Thank you. And we can bring up the results from the previous poll. I will just wrap up the topic from my perspective that there is obviously a lot of scare at the moment how the things will shape up, and I agree with you, Shirley, that it will probably be up to local jurisdictions in various cities how much they will enforce and to what degree the existing regulations. We already see that it's a bit uneven. There is more stricter regulations going on in Beijing and Shanghai, for example, whilst, for example, Tianjin, where we are based and we monitor the situation, is a little bit more loose on implementing. On the other hand, many schools have faced various audits. Private schools' accounts have been sort of taken under control of government to see what kind of cash flow they generate, and if there is any outside funding that they are creating through the after-school activities. The textbooks have been asked to be reviewed, and these are the existing hurdles that institutions are dealing with and adopting. But we feel that over a time, when the dust sort of settles, there will be more operational space for all institutions. They just need to find a way how to be compliant. Definitely government will have a bigger role in all of this, but the institutions will be able to find a way how to continue to operate by following the overall sort of regulations and preferences. So it's a process, and we are probably somewhere at the beginning of it, and it's a big thing. Good. Mindful of the time, I'll probably fast forward towards the last theme, and then let's have a look at the questions. I'm counting quite a few from the audience. So what would be your recommendations in light of this, in light of the longer term effects of the pandemic and the lockdown on the market, also in light of regulations ongoing in the after school sector, what would you recommend to educators? What kind of recruitment channels they could leverage? What kind of strategies they could leverage to remain relevant in the market, to consolidate the market share, to continue building partnerships and recruitment channels in China, and to adapt to the changing education market in China? So perhaps Anna, if you would.
Yeah, sure, Igor. I think for China team at ApplyBoard during COVID, we adopted a combination of virtual, digital, online, offline marketing and recruitment strategies. We even have a dedicated team in the headquarters in Canada to serve this market. But as Shirley mentioned in the last question, the tailored format is important, but the most important thing is the content. We need very good content to help our students. And I think one thing we learned from this pandemic is to become more proactive instead of reactive. When we plan things, when we try to think about recruit more students, we use the bottom perspective, which is what's the exact questions we're trying to answer and what are the real problems we're trying to solve for our students. And for us, we always use the like traditional methodology, although it's quite theoretical, but we found it's very useful to our recruitment, which is always put the market segmentation, the value proposition, and also the recruitment ROI in mind when we develop all the strategies. Definitely, it's not easy as it sounds because there are so many stakeholders in this industry, from school to agents, sub-agents, then parents and students. I think ultimately we should always put students' needs first, and to think about like all those methodology, how to promote the marketing and the recruitment activities. Yeah, that is my second thought.
Thank you, very useful. And I would like to call up our last poll question, which is contextually fitting. So let's have a vote on that. And Shirley, what do you think? What are some of the effective recruitment channels that have come to the fore in the context of the current circumstances in the market and that can be leveraged?
So the agency's recruitment strategy is echoed to what I just described. The after pandemic, we see huge opportunity. This is what we partner with BONARD already, was like doing a lot of researches to really look at the key cities, and also was like key regions that we can grow faster, to recover faster. So after pandemic, we do see the sign that a lot of new agencies join back the market, and also a lot of agency in our network reactivated post-pandemic. So the strategy really for Shorelight is that one is to quickly reactivate existing channels. Meanwhile, we have to speed up our sub-agencies or new agencies expansion, focus on those kind of growing areas. Of course, the challenging part is where is really the right growing city and region for us to put the manpower resource and the marketing resource, etc. But put it simple is that the channel expansion, this is really fit by to my role as a channel development. The strategy really is expanding and the reactivation. That's the main strategy, really.
Thank you, Shirley. Very useful. And we can share the results of the last poll. Gentlemen, probably I will not ask you the same because of the time shortage. So I favored ladies for this question. Hope you don't mind. But there are certainly questions from the audience and we can try to answer those. And the last poll question says that the most preferable recruitment strategy to adopt in the next 6 months seems to be to attend online agent fairs. So the online virtual based solutions probably will remain very relevant in the next half of a year, combined with digital marketing. Interesting. Good. So we have quite a few questions from the audience. I'm just going to have a quick look. As my colleagues try to compile the list, we probably won't be able to take all, as there is over 13 of them, but let's try as many as we can. Because of the new policies that want to increase the number of students attending vocational trades, which may affect the ability of students to attend university, what are the forecast of students going abroad to study K-12 and on to university? That's the first question we have. So without any particular order, would anyone like to answer?
I'll take a stab at that one. I'll make a pretty bold prediction to say that it'll have absolutely no effect on outbound study. The government has pushed really hard promoting vocational education, but it's very clear that parents in particular are not being won over by that argument. I think if you look at where policy-wise, China has created lists that are encouraging investment in certain areas. Anytime in China something gets put on a list that's encouraged for foreign investment, and that's what's happened with vocational training. It's been put on some lists that eases pathways to investing foreign capital in it. Usually when that happens to me, it's put on a list like that, it means that it's not attractive to private capital in China. It's not working, so they're opening it up to external players. And I think that says a lot about what the potential is. And the demand is just not there from parents and students. And even as we see China become very massified in terms of higher education, really high higher education enrollment rates, that's just going to be the standard, the bar that most students will think they will need. We'll be looking at additional qualifications on top of that, but higher education will still be, essentially a requirement for most Chinese students who are looking at the workplace.
Thank you. There's another, I think, let's ask John this one. How will US-China political relations affect student recruitment? There's many questions related to the political relations. So John, what's your perspective on this?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Well, this is not a direct answer, but we coincidentally just finished a big data report specifically on the US market, and it was very interesting. And I hope that we can do a second webinar with BONARD on it. But the demand is still there, and that actually does lead into something I want to bring up as a sort of a tip for working with agents, because the public, it's very hard for them to discern what is the reality in what they see in the news, whether it's from the US or UK or Canada. So you want to give as clear information and real truthful accounts of what's going on in your campus, your city, your location as you can, because it's very difficult for or it can be difficult for somebody has no knowledge or any ties to your school to get the correct information. But yeah, you may have seen the Open Doors report. The numbers from China to the US are starting to taper off. I mean, they're still slightly growing, but definitely cooling down. And we think that's just going to stay the same for a while, plateauing, you could say. But we still are hopeful and optimistic about Chinese students going to the US despite the political and pandemic and everything else.
Thank you. Another. Do you think that double relief policy will encourage more parents to send their children to overseas boarding schools? Anna, what do you think?
I think it is possible, given the emerging number of the middle class in China. Some families, they may plan the overseas education at a younger age. But I think meanwhile, it's very important to see what are the real needs for those families, what are the real problems they're trying to solve through sending kids to like abroad for K-12, and what are the supply, what are the resources we have, and how to make sure the supply and demand is well matched. Instead of just because of the policy students go abroad, we need to have a very sustainable and healthy plan for the kids in the long term.
Thank you. I was also thinking to contribute to this that, and it's related to the recruitment channels and what works and what kind of approach and message to take. And I think as educators, we often look at the education as the end to the student journey. However, I think for Chinese parents, it is often a means towards achieving something else, and that something else is something bigger. It's a certain foundation, certain stability in life, a marriage, a family, and in order to stand out in such a highly populated and competitive market, overseas education is a very distinguishing competitive factor. So attaining a prestigious degree, gaining overseas experience, worldview, learning another language, it makes the student stand out. And for anxious parent, this is the strategy, this is basically the main moving motive, and something that perhaps institutions not necessarily go deep enough when presenting various materials and pathways and channels for students for their career. So it's another way how you can look at the recruitment and how to position the message as overseas educator to potential students and their parents. I will wrap up because we are through the hour, so there is just few technical questions. What is a virtual trade mission? A virtual trade mission is essentially very similar format to the in-person trade mission, except that it does not happen in the source markets. In this case, it would be China, but it happens virtually either through Zoom or through any other virtual meeting platform, but you can still meet agents, quality agents and decision makers from the comfort of your living room in your time zone. And it's a way how to bridge the distance while the travel remains difficult for China. Anna could say about it because she's quarantining right now in a hotel, right, Anna? So it's not so easy to travel to China these days.
Yeah, that's true. Like different cities and provinces have different policies. It's not easy, but because our company gonna have a live event in Beijing, so I'm committed to that. I have to go through. Yeah, but on the other hand, it's also an experience for me, like how the Chinese government controls the COVID very well. So yeah, it's an experience.
It's
Certainly.
all okay now, Anna. You can travel through go in and out Beijing. Now it's getting controlled. Shanghai, Beijing. Sorry. So our staff is flying from Beijing to Shanghai next week. We have postponed out the meeting for a few weeks just because of the COVID situation there in Beijing, but now all okay.
Well, finger crossed. Our event is the end of October.
Nice. And our event is happening virtually in November 8th to 9th. Okay, any closing remarks from our fellow panelists? Matthew, anything, any final words?
I would just say, one thing to watch out for in the coming years, to be careful what you believe. We've seen a lot of statistics about mobility that I think are don't mean quite what people think they do. So we've seen really encouraging numbers through UCAS. I think one of the biggest trends we're seeing right now is that students are applying to multiple study destinations. So it's inflating our numbers quite a bit. So we won't really see until we actually have them joining classes exactly how many of them were in our pipelines. So things are going to get better, but I think it's a little bit rocky road to get back to our pre-pandemic normal, but we will get there. It's just going to take a bit of time.
Agreed. John, anything from you?
Not a whole lot. I just want to thank you for inviting me on here, and it's been a pleasure presenting with some of the best minds in the industry.
Nicely put. Anna?
I would say there are still lots of opportunities for our industry in this market. Let's always put students' needs first. Let's work collaboratively, just like today. I think today is a very good example, like how different players in this industry could share our insights, could learn from each other. So thank you, Igor and Grace, again. And the last thing I would like to humbly remind is any solution we come up with for the next 12 months may not work for the long term. So I think for people in this industry, it's very important to have both the short-term and long-term planning. Yeah, that's my summary. Thank you again.
Very well put. Thank you. And Shirley, feel free.
Thanks. I just want to say that the last 18 months really tell us the big truth that the changing is the only thing that won't change. So I would really want to highlight 3 things that I think Shorelight has been doing very well. And this is the kind of a recommendation or suggestions for all the agencies, partners as well, which is adaptive and innovative and agile. So I think by all those that we can go through all these difficulty challenges.
Thank you. From my side, I would love to carry this conversation further. Indeed, some great minds have met on this panel, and I hope the audiences have enjoyed. Unfortunately, we are limited by the time, and I have tremendous respect for the fact that for many of you, it's already past midnight, and you made the commitment to be here. So really, thank you very much for your time. Have some well-deserved rest, and hopefully to see you in the industry in person someday soon. And for any questions that we could not answer, apologies. Again, we probably couldn't fit within the time, but we will do a follow-up and try to answer as many of them as a follow-up to this panel. And you will receive the recording and the presentation. So rest assured that you will have content from it. Thank you very much, and signing off. Bye-bye.